He acquired a human being not for labor, but solely to serve as a caretaker for his motherless little girl. Yet the moment he uncovered her nightly secret activities, his entire existence was forever altered. During 1853 America, at the peak of antebellum prosperity, gentlemen of the Southern elite satisfied their household needs by acquiring enslaved people, much like they would purchase furnishings. For prosperous plantation owners and affluent merchants, hiring an enslaved nurse was considered both ordinary and expedient. Colonel William Harrison Beaumont desperately sought someone to tend to his 3-year-old daughter following the loss of his wife during the birth of their second child. He purchased Catherine, a 25-year-old enslaved woman, anticipating merely that she would maintain the child's nourishment and cleanliness. Yet Catherine concealed mysteries extending far beyond her assigned duties. What began as a purely professional arrangement evolved into something unforeseen by either party. When William discovered that each night Catherine was instructing his daughter in something legally prohibited, something that endangered both their freedom, yet revealed a spirit so remarkable that it made the colonel reconsider everything he held true. When Catherine's hidden history emerged, that she was no ordinary enslaved person, but a woman whose education matched his own, the resulting scandal reverberated through Charleston's social foundation. The affection that developed between them challenged not merely social norms, but the very laws governing their world. What transpired when an influential man realized he had obtained not a domestic, but rather an educator in concealment will demonstrate how genuine love can blossom in the most improbable settings and permanently transform lives. Share from which city you're experiencing this narrative and prepare to learn how one ordinary decision can alter an entire family's destiny. Before we advance with this remarkable tale, remember to subscribe to our channel and indicate which city you're listening from. Let's strengthen our community so these narratives are never forgotten. My gratitude, and let's proceed. The Charleston, South Carolina slave market buzzed with activity on that humid September morning in 1853, when Colonel William Harrison Beaumont stepped from his carriage carrying both a clear purpose and a burdened spirit. At 34, he had become a widower merely 4 months earlier, when his cherished wife Elizabeth succumbed to complications following their second child's birth, an infant who likewise perished. William surveyed the marketplace with emotions mixing revulsion and acceptance. He had never personally acquired enslaved individuals, consistently assigning that duty to his overseers at the upriver cotton plantation. Yet circumstances had grown desperate. His daughter Margaret, barely 3, had wept ceaselessly since her mother's passing. She rejected proper nourishment and had driven away 4 consecutive nurses with her challenging disposition. The child's sorrow manifested through outbursts, nighttime terrors, and stubborn rejection of comfort from anyone attempting to fill her mother's role. Morning air hung thick with harbor scents. Salt and fish mingling with humanity crowded excessively together. William felt nausea rise as he witnessed families separated, children clinging to mothers, men examined like livestock. He had matured surrounded by enslavement, inherited human property alongside his father's plantation, yet never personally participated in this particular transaction. His departed wife Elizabeth had always managed domestic staff, and he remained contentedly ignorant of unpleasant specifics. "I require a young woman, healthy, experienced with small children," he informed the dealer, a portly, perspiring individual named Theodore Marsh, renowned throughout Charleston for his house servant inventory, possessing unlimited patience. "My daughter proves challenging. She has endured terrible loss and needs someone with gentle disposition yet steady guidance." "I possess precisely what you seek," Theodore responded, his small eyes gleaming at potential profit. He guided William through the marketplace toward a reserved section where premium merchandise was displayed, separated from common field hands and dock workers. Exceptional piece, young, robust, exceptionally clean, originates from Virginia Plantation, where she attended the master's children. Light complexion, delicate features, knows proper household conduct, worth every penny, I assure you. Among women seated on wooden benches, William noticed one who distinguished herself, not merely through appearance but through bearing. While others maintained downcast eyes in submission, accepting their fate, this woman observed everything around her with alert intelligence that immediately captured his attention. Something in her demeanor suggested she hadn't been born to this station, though he couldn't precisely identify what created that impression. Catherine was 25, possessing light brown skin resembling caramel, dark wavy hair gathered in a simple braid draping one shoulder, and hazel eyes seeming to harbor profound secrets. She wore a faded blue cotton dress mended in numerous places, yet remarkably clean given circumstances. Her hands, William observed, appeared delicate and well-maintained, not calloused from field labor or even heavy domestic work. Her nails were trimmed neatly. When she shifted position, her movements demonstrated grace, suggesting deportment training. "This here is Catherine," Theodore announced with practiced patter developed from selling hundreds of human beings. 25 years old, healthy as a horse, no vices, excellent with children, very compliant. Trained in quality Virginia household, knows proper ways, can cook if necessary, but specializes in little ones' care. The family owning her encountered financial hardship, forced to sell household staff. Their misfortune becomes your advantage, Colonel. William approached and Catherine raised her gaze to meet his. For an instant he felt she could perceive his very soul, as if those hazel eyes could penetrate beyond his fine attire and respected reputation to the grief and desperation he carried within. There existed depth in that look unsettling him, intelligence seemingly inappropriate for someone in her position. Enslaved people were supposed to be simple, uneducated, incapable of the penetrating observation he witnessed in her expression. "You possess experience caring for small children?" he inquired directly, breaching protocol by addressing her rather than communicating solely through the dealer. "Yes, sir," Catherine responded with soft yet steady voice, carrying cultured inflection he couldn't quite identify. Neither the thick dialect of field hands, nor the affected speech of house servants mimicking their masters. "I have attended numerous children over years, from infancy through early education." William noticed how she structured her response, not merely confirming experience, but offering additional information about her charge's age range. Most enslaved individuals would have simply answered yes or no. "Difficult children?" he pressed. "Who cry excessively, refuse nourishment. Children who have lost mothers." He observed something flicker in her eyes, a shadow of pain suggesting personal encounter with loss. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "Grieving children require particular attention. They need patience, consistency, and someone recognizing their behavior stems not from defiance, but from pain-seeking expression." The observation proved so perceptive, so precisely aligned with what the physician had explained about Margaret's condition that William felt his breath catch. He stared at Catherine, attempting to comprehend how an enslaved person could articulate what he himself had struggled to understand. "How did you know?" he asked quietly, momentarily forgetting Theodore's presence. "How did you know about my daughter's situation?" "From how you speak of the girl, sir," Catherine said, her voice gentle, "and from the sadness in your eyes. A man doesn't seek a nurse with such urgency unless his need is desperate, and that kind of desperation typically combines love and loss." Theodore shifted uncomfortably, clearly displeased with his merchandise speaking so freely. "No, Catherine, you simply answer the gentleman's questions without all the extra words," he said sharply. But William raised a hand. "No, let her speak." He looked at Catherine intently. "You understand grief. You've witnessed it in children before." "I've observed it in numerous forms, sir. In children losing parents, in parents losing children. Grief remains grief whether wearing fine clothing or rags." This philosophical response, delivered with such simple dignity, stirred something in William's chest. This was no ordinary enslaved person. Whatever her circumstances, however she came to stand on this auction block, Something extraordinary existed within her. Theodore, sensing the sale moving favorably, pressed his advantage. As you can observe, Connell, she speaks well and understands quality care. A girl like this will integrate perfectly into your household. 'Cause no trouble, and provide your little daughter exactly what she requires. How much? William asked, still regarding Catherine rather than the dealer. $800. Now, that may seem substantial, but for a skilled nurse of her quality, trained in proper household, it's quite reasonable. I could easily obtain 1,000 from families on Trad Street, but I prefer seeing my merchandise placed in good homes where they'll be appreciated. It was indeed a high price, nearly double what a field hand would cost, significantly more than most house servants. Yet William was desperate, and something about Catherine communicated to him, on a level he couldn't articulate. Perhaps it was hope that this unusual woman might succeed where others failed. Perhaps simple desperation, or perhaps something else, something he wasn't yet ready to name. "I'll pay it," he said. "Have your man prepare the documents." Theodore's face split into a broad smile. "Excellent choice, Colonel. I guarantee you won't regret it. Catherine will serve you well." An hour later, William guided Catherine toward his carriage, her few possessions tied in a small cloth bundle. As they walked through the market, Catherine kept her eyes forward, spine straight despite her circumstances' degradation. William noticed how other enslaved individuals seemed to defer to her. How even in this terrible place, she carried herself with quiet dignity commanding respect. The carriage waited on East Bay Street. William's driver James perched on the box. James himself, enslaved, with the Beaumont family for 20 years, raised eyebrows seeing Catherine, but said nothing, simply nodding respectfully as William assisted her into the carriage. During the ride to William's mansion on King Street, in the fashionable district south of Broad, William explained the situation more fully. The carriage rolled through elegant streets lined with palmetto trees and ornate iron gates, past gracious homes of Charleston's elite. "My daughter Margaret is 3 years old," he began, watching Catherine's face as he spoke. "She lost her mother 4 months ago during childbirth. My wife Elizabeth developed fever after delivery and didn't survive. The child, a son, lived only 2 days." His voice caught slightly. "Since then, Margaret has been inconsolable. She cries for hours, refuses more than a few bites at meals, wakes screaming from nightmares. We've had 4 nurses attempt her care. The first 2 she simply wore down with constant tears and demands. The third lost temper and struck Margaret when the child wouldn't stop crying. I dismissed her immediately. The 4th departed yesterday, claiming she couldn't bear the strain any longer. The child is testing them," Catherine said thoughtfully. When children lose a parent, especially their mother, they often become difficult as a way of testing whether the new caregiver will also abandon them. Each time a nurse leaves, it confirms Margaret's fear that everyone she loves will disappear. William stared at her. "That's exactly what Dr. Peyton said." "How do you know this?" "I have cared for grieving children before, sir. The patterns remain similar regardless of circumstances." "You mentioned earlier that the father must also be considered. What did you mean?" Catherine hesitated, weighing how much honesty she could afford. Children are sensitive to adults' emotions around them. If Margaret perceives her father grieving also, if she senses his sadness and perhaps his difficulty managing his own pain while caring for her, she may react to that as much as to her mother's absence. Sometimes children act out because they don't know how else to express seeing their parents suffer. This insight struck directly at William's heart. He had struggled so hard to maintain composure, to remain strong for Margaret, yet suppressing his own grief while attempting to comfort his daughter had proven exhausting. At night, alone in the bedroom he'd shared with Elizabeth, he wept. But before Margaret and the household staff, he maintained the stoic facade expected of Southern gentlemen. "You seem to understand a great deal about the human heart," he said quietly. "Where did you learn such things?" "Life teaches many things, sir," Catherine replied, turning to look out the window at passing houses. Loss is a universal teacher. They rode in silence several minutes before William spoke again. You'll be responsible for all of Margaret's care, feeding, bathing, dressing, entertaining, putting her to bed. The household is managed by Mrs. Beatrice Thornton, our housekeeper for 15 years. She runs a tight ship and expects all staff to maintain high standards. You'll take meals in the servants' dining room and report any concerns about Margaret directly to Mrs. Thornton, not to me. Will I be permitted to take Margaret outside, to the garden or for walks? The question surprised him. Most enslaved individuals wouldn't presume to inquire about duties, but would simply wait for instruction. Yes, of course. Fresh air and exercise are important for children. Our garden is secure and private. And if Margaret needs something, clothing or books or toys, how shall I communicate that? Books, William repeated. You think she needs books? She's only 3. Children are never too young for stories, sir. And if she's learning to speak well, picture books can help develop vocabulary. Again, William found himself surprised by Catherine's insights. I'll ensure you have appropriate materials for her care and education. When they arrived at the mansion, Catherine descended from the carriage and looked up at the impressive 3-story structure with its tall columns and wide piazzas. The house ranked among King Street's finest, built of Charleston gray brick with white trim, surrounded by elaborate gardens enclosed by iron fencing. William watched her face, expecting the awe most enslaved individuals displayed when first witnessing such wealth. Instead, Catherine's expression appeared thoughtful, analytical, as if cataloging the household rather than being overwhelmed by it. Mrs. Beatrice Thornton waited in the entrance hall, a tall woman with iron, gray hair pulled back in severe bun, and sharp blue eyes missing nothing. She surveyed Catherine up and down with an expression suggesting skepticism. This is Catherine, William said. She will care for Margaret. Please show her to the quarters we prepared, then bring Margaret to meet her. I'll be in my study if needed. Yes, sir, Mrs. Thornton said crisply. She turned to Catherine. Follow me. As William climbed the stairs to his second-floor study, he heard Mrs. Thornton's voice echoing in the stairwell as she led Catherine upward. I run a proper household here. Cleanliness, punctuality, and obedience are expected at all times. The Colonel is a good master, but he will not tolerate laziness or insubordination. Do you understand? Yes, Ma'am. Catherine's voice responded, clear and respectful but not servile. William found himself hoping Catherine wouldn't be cowed by Mrs. Thornton's severity. The housekeeper was efficient and loyal, yet she ruled domestic staff with iron hand and had little patience for what she considered weakness or sentiment. The room designated for Catherine occupied the second floor in the rear of the house, adjacent to Margaret's nursery. It was small but comfortable by servants' quarter standards. Narrow bed covered in simple quilt, chest of drawers for clothing, washstand with pitcher and basin, single chair near the window. The window itself overlooked the back garden, offering view of carefully tended roses and the old oak tree dominating the space. This is your room, Mrs. Thornton said. Keep it neat. There will be inspection every Saturday morning. Meals are served in servants' dining room at 6 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening. You'll eat with other house staff. Miss Margaret takes meals in the nursery, and you'll be responsible for ensuring she eats properly. Her clothes are in the wardrobe in her room. She has a bath every evening before bed. Any questions? May I ask what Miss Margaret's routine has been? Catherine inquired. What time does she wake? When does she nap? What are her preferences for food and play? Mrs. Thornton's expression softened slightly. She wakes early, usually by 6. She used to nap after lunch, but lately she fights sleep and often cries herself into exhaustion by mid-afternoon. She picks at food, especially vegetables. She used to enjoy playing with dolls and looking at picture books with her mother. But since Mrs. Beaumont passed, she's shown little interest in toys. The housekeeper's voice held a note of sadness. She was such a happy child before. Now she just seems lost. I'll do my best to help her find her way back, Catherine said gently. See that you do. The Colonel loves that child more than anything in this world. If you can ease her suffering, you'll have his eternal gratitude. After Mrs. Thornton left to fetch Margaret, Catherine stood alone in her small room. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden, taking several deep breaths. 3 years since her kidnapping. 3 years of hiding who she truly was. 3 years of enduring degradation and fear. And now she was here in this beautiful house, charged with caring for a motherless child. Perhaps, she thought, this was where her luck might finally turn. She heard small footsteps in the hall accompanied by Mrs. Thornton's heavier tread. Catherine turned from the window and straightened her spine, preparing to meet her new charge. Margaret was a tiny thing, smaller than Catherine had expected for 3 years old. She had blonde curly hair carefully combed, but already coming loose from its ribbons, and enormous blue eyes dominating her small pale face. The child was thin, too thin, with dark circles under her eyes speaking of numerous sleepless nights. She wore a beautiful white dress with blue embroidery, but it hung loosely on her small frame. She clutched a worn rag doll in one hand and kept the other firmly attached to Mrs. Thornton's skirt. Miss Margaret, this is Catherine. Mrs. Thornton said, her voice gentler than when speaking to Catherine alone. She has come to take care of you. Margaret stared at Catherine with solemn, suspicious eyes. Her lower lip trembled slightly, as if preparing to cry. Catherine knelt down slowly, bringing herself to the child's eye level. She made no move to approach or touch Margaret, simply smiled softly. Hello, Margaret, she said in a gentle voice. My name is Catherine. I came to be your friend. Margaret didn't respond, only pressed herself more firmly against Mrs. Thornton's leg, her eyes never leaving Catherine's face. You have very beautiful eyes, Catherine continued, keeping her voice soft and non-threatening. They're the color of the sky on a clear summer day. I bet your mama used to tell you that. I bet she told you have the prettiest eyes she ever saw. At mention of her mother, Margaret's face crumpled and tears began streaming down her cheeks. Mrs. Thornton looked alarmed and was about to speak when Catherine did something unexpected. She began to sing very softly, a melody seeming to come from another world entirely. The words were in a language neither Margaret nor Mrs. Thornton recognized, something African and ancient. But the melody was actually beautiful, full of longing and comfort in equal measure. Margaret's sobs began to quiet. She loosened her grip on Mrs. Thornton's skirt and took a half step forward, eyes wide and fixed on Catherine's face. The tears still flowed, but silently now, as if the music had given her grief a gentler form of expression. When the song ended, the room was silent except for Margaret's shaky breathing. The child had moved several steps closer to Catherine without seeming to realize it. That was beautiful, Mrs. Thornton said quietly. I've never heard anything like it. William's voice came from the doorway. What language was that? Catherine turned, startled. She hadn't heard him approach. He stood in the doorway with an expression of wonder on his face. An African lullaby, sir, she said, rising from her kneeling position. My mother taught it to me when I was very small. It speaks of stars that watch over children while they sleep, protecting them and keeping them safe through the night. You speak African? William asked, moving into the room. Some words and phrases, sir. My mother came from Africa originally and remembered some of the old songs. William looked at his daughter, who was still staring at Catherine with rapt attention. It was the first time in weeks that Margaret had shown interest in anything beyond her own grief. Margaret, sweetheart, he said gently, crouching beside his daughter, do you like Catherine singing? Margaret nodded slowly, still not speaking. Would you like her to stay and take care of you? To sing to you and play with you? Another small nod. William felt something loosen in his chest. A tiny seed of hope. Catherine, would you mind staying with Margaret for the rest of the afternoon? I think she's comfortable with you. Of course, sir. I'd be honored. In the days following, William found himself observing Catherine, with growing fascination and curiosity. She moved through the household with quiet efficiency, her entire focus on Margaret. The transformation in his daughter was gradual but unmistakable. The constant crying diminished. Margaret began eating more at meals, still picking at food, but consuming enough to ease William's worries. The night terrors continued. Yet Catherine seemed gifted at soothing the child back to sleep. William would sometimes wake in the night to hear that strange, beautiful African melody floating through the house, and he would know Catherine was singing Margaret out of a nightmare. More remarkably, Margaret began to smile again. Small smiles at first, fleeting and fragile, but real. She laughed at something Catherine said during breakfast. She played with dolls while Catherine sewed. She asked questions about garden flowers as Catherine walked with her among roses. William watched these developments with relief and gratitude, but also with growing puzzlement. Catherine was unlike any enslaved person he had ever known. Her speech was too refined, her knowledge too broad, her manner too confident. She never overstepped boundaries, always addressing him and Mrs. Thornton with proper respect. Yet something in her bearing suggested she played a role rather than living her natural state. He noticed little things. How she held a book when looking at picture books with Margaret. As if reading rather than simply examining illustrations, the grace of her movements. More like a lady than a servant, the vocabulary she used, words like consistency and temperament and anxiety, seeming beyond what an enslaved person would know. Her posture always upright, her hands always clean and well kept despite her work. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after Catherine's arrival, William was working in his study when he heard voices from the garden below. He walked to the window and looked down to see Catherine and Margaret sitting on a blanket under the oak tree. Margaret was laughing at something, actually laughing, a sound William had feared he might never hear again. Catherine was helping her make chains from clover flowers, their heads bent together over the work. "You're a quick learner, Miss Margaret," Catherine was saying, her voice clear in the quiet afternoon air. "See how you make the loop and thread the next stem through. That's the way. You could be a fine seamstress one day if you wished, or you could make beautiful things just for the joy of creating them." "Will you always stay with me?" Margaret asked, her child's voice plaintive. "Will you be my mama now?" William's breath caught. He leaned closer to the window, desperate to hear Catherine's response. "I will stay with you as long as your papa wishes me to," Catherine said gently. "I can't be your mama, because you already have a mama up in heaven watching over you, but I can be your friend and your teacher and someone who loves you very much. Would that be all right?" "I suppose," Margaret said, "but I wish you could be my mama too. Then you could never leave. People we love don't really leave us, sweetheart. They live in our hearts. Your mama will always be part of you, in your pretty eyes and your kind heart, and your curiosity about the world. And I promise that as long as I'm with you, I'll take care of you and teach you, and help you grow into the wonderful person you're meant to be." William felt tears prick his eyes. This woman, this enslaved person whose name he barely knew, was giving his daughter something precious beyond measure. She was giving her permission to grieve, while also offering hope for the future. She wasn't trying to replace Elizabeth, but rather helping Margaret learn to live with loss. That evening, after Margaret slept, William asked Mrs. Thornton about Catherine's behavior. "She's exceptional, sir," the housekeeper said. "I've never seen anyone connect with a child so quickly. Miss Margaret hasn't cried during the day for nearly a week now. She eats vegetables when Catherine tells stories about how food helps us grow strong. She goes to bed without fuss. It's remarkable." "What do you know about Catherine's background? Where she came from before?" Mrs. Thornton shrugged. "Only what the trader told you, sir. From Virginia, trained in a good household. Why do you ask? Does she seem like other enslaved people to you?" The housekeeper paused, considering. "Now that you mention it, sir, no. She speaks quite well, better than many white women of my acquaintance, if I'm honest. And she has a way about her, a kind of dignity that's unusual. But she works hard and causes no trouble, so I have no complaints. Have you seen her reading? Reading, sir? Mrs. Thornton looked shocked. Certainly not. That would be illegal. Why would you think? Just a question, William said quickly. She seems educated, that's all. Well, somehow enslaved people pick up refined ways from their masters. Perhaps that's all it is. But William didn't think that was all it was. Over the next several days, he paid closer attention, and what he observed only deepened his conviction that Catherine was hiding something significant about her past. She was too knowledgeable about too many things. When Margaret asked about birds in the garden, Catherine could identify them by species and tell the child about their habits. When Margaret wondered about stars, Catherine explained constellations with precision, suggesting formal education. She spoke French phrases occasionally, translating them for Margaret as if teaching a foreign language were the most natural thing in the world. And then, 2 weeks later, William discovered the truth in a way that left him shaken to his core. It was a warm October evening, and William was working late in his study on correspondence related to his plantation business. The house was quiet, servants retired to their quarters, Margaret long since asleep. He had been working several hours when he realized he needed a particular ledger from the library on the 3rd floor. As he climbed the stairs, he heard a soft voice coming from Margaret's room. He paused on the landing, listening. It was Catherine's voice, but she wasn't singing or telling stories. She was speaking in a measured, instructional tone that made William's blood run cold. This is the letter A, Margaret. It makes the sound O like in apple or A like in able. And this letter is B, which makes the ba sound like in ball or book. William moved silently to Margaret's door, which stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could see Catherine sitting on Margaret's bed, with his daughter nestled against her side. Between them was a primer, a basic reading book, and Catherine was systematically teaching Margaret to recognize letters and their sounds. Teaching an enslaved person to read was illegal throughout the South, punishable by fines and imprisonment. Teaching any enslaved individual to read and write was considered dangerous, a path to rebellion and insurrection. But more shocking than the illegality was the fact that Catherine obviously knew how to read, and read well. She wasn't stumbling through the primer, but moving through it with confidence and skill of an experienced teacher. William stood frozen in the hallway, watching as Catherine patiently guided Margaret's small finger from letter to letter, asking questions to check understanding, offering praise and encouragement. His mind raced with questions and implications. How had an enslaved person learned to read so well? Where had she received such obvious education? And why was she risking severe punishment to teach his daughter? He watched for perhaps 10 minutes before silently retreating down the hallway to his study. He closed the door and sat in his chair, hands trembling slightly. He should confront her immediately. He should summon authorities. Teaching enslaved people to read wasn't just illegal. It was considered a threat to the entire social order. If word spread that he harbored a literate enslaved person who was teaching his daughter, his reputation would be destroyed. But even as these thoughts ran through his mind, William found he couldn't muster appropriate outrage. Instead, he felt a strange mixture of awe and curiosity. Who was Catherine really? How had she acquired such education? And what kind of extraordinary woman would risk everything to teach a 3-year-old child to read? He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his study and thought about everything he had observed over the past weeks. Catherine's refined speech, her knowledge of history and science and languages, her graceful movements and proper posture, her ability to connect with Margaret on a level, suggesting not just experience with children, but genuine education in pedagogy. None of it fit with her supposed background as an enslaved person trained in a Virginia household. By morning, William had made a decision. He would confront Catherine privately and demand truth. If she had been lying about her past, he needed to know. but he would hear her out before deciding what action to take. He waited until afternoon when Margaret was napping. He asked Mrs. Thornton to ensure they wouldn't be disturbed and summoned Catherine to his study. She entered with her usual composure, though he thought he detected a hint of apprehension in her eyes. She stood before his desk with hands folded, posture perfect, waiting for him to speak. "Catherine," he began, deciding to be direct. "I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer me honestly." "Yes, sir," she said, voice steady. "Where were you born?" "In Maryland, sir." "Which plantation?" "I wasn't born on a plantation, sir. I was born in Baltimore." The answer wasn't what he expected. Enslaved people weren't generally born in cities, unless their mothers were house servants for urban families. "What was your mother's name?" "Sarah Mitchell." "And your father?" Catherine hesitated for just a moment. "James Mitchell." "They were both enslaved?" "No, sir." William leaned forward, pulse quickening. "What were they?" "They were free people of color, sir." The room seemed to spin. "You're telling me you were born free?" "Yes, sir." "Then how?" He couldn't finish the sentence, but Catherine understood. "I was kidnapped, sir, 3 years ago. My parents had both died, and I was living alone in Baltimore. Men came in the night, men who claimed my father owed them money. They destroyed my freedom papers and sold me to a trader who falsified documents, saying I'd been born enslaved. I've been sold 4 times since then, passed from place to place before ending up in Charleston." William felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. If what she said was true, if she truly had been born free, then he hadn't purchased an enslaved person at all. He had purchased a free woman illegally enslaved. The implications were staggering. "Can you prove any of this?" he asked. "My documents were destroyed. My house was burned. Anyone who knew my family is in Baltimore, and who would believe them against white men with legal papers, false though they may be." "How did you learn to read?" "My father taught me. He was a skilled carpenter, a respected man in the free-colored community. He believed education was essential. I can read and write in English and French. I studied mathematics, history, geography. My father wanted me to be able to support myself, to never be dependent on anyone." "I saw you teaching Margaret last night," William said quietly. "I saw you with the primer." Catherine's face went pale. "Sir, do you know what could happen to you, to both of us, if I reported this?" "Yes, sir. I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have presumed. It's just that Margaret is so bright, so eager to learn, and it seemed wrong to let her mind lie fallow when it could be developing. But I understand if you must punish me. I accept the consequences." She stood before him with perfect dignity, ready to face whatever judgment he would render. And in that moment, William realized that everything about her made sense now. She wasn't an enslaved person trying to act like a free person. She was a free person forced into slavery. And even under that burden, her true nature shone through. "Catherine," he said slowly, "if what you're telling me is true, if you were really born free, then you're being held illegally. I would have purchased you under false pretenses." "That's correct." "Sir, why didn't you say something before, when I first bought you? Would you have believed me? A colored woman in a slave market claiming to be free. Mr. Marsh had legal documents. False though they were, I have nothing but my word." She was right, of course. In the social and legal structure of the South, an enslaved person's testimony was worthless against a white man's documents. "I need time to think about this," William said. This is more complex than I can process immediately." "I understand. Sir, may I ask what you intend to do?" "I don't know yet. But Catherine," he looked at her intently, "I want the truth, all of it. I want to know exactly what happened to you, who you were before, how you ended up here. Can you tell me that?" "Yes, sir. If you truly want to know, I'll tell you everything. Come back tonight after Margaret is asleep. We'll talk then, privately." Catherine nodded and left the study, and William sat alone with his thoughts churning. If Catherine's story was true, then he had an enormous decision to make. He could ignore what he'd learned. Continue keeping her as an enslaved person, and no one would be wiser. He could report her literacy and have her sold away, removing the problem from his household. Or he could investigate her claims and, if they proved true, help her recover her freedom. The last option would cost him $800 and would deprive Margaret of the best caregiver she'd ever had. It would also be the right thing to do. That night, after the household had settled and Margaret slept soundly, Catherine came to his study. William had prepared a fire against the evening chill and had 2 chairs arranged so they could speak face to face rather than across the formal barrier of his desk. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs, "and tell me your story, all of it." Catherine sat, took a deep breath, and began. "My father, James Mitchell, was born enslaved on a tobacco plantation in southern Maryland. When he was 25 years old, his master died, and in his will manumitted several of his enslaved people, including my father. My father was a talented carpenter, and he used his skills to build a good life. He moved to Baltimore and established himself as a craftsman. He made furniture, did construction work, built a reputation for quality and reliability." She paused, eyes distant with memory. "My mother, Sarah, was born free. Her parents had purchased their freedom years before she was born. She worked as a seamstress and was known for her beautiful work. And my parents met at church, married, and I was born in 1828. They named me Catherine after my grandmother." "You were educated from childhood?" William asked. "Yes. My father insisted on it. He said slavery had stolen his childhood and his youth, and he was determined that I would have every advantage. He hired a tutor for me when I was 5. By the time I was 10, I could read English and French, do mathematics through algebra, and knew history and geography, as well as any white child in a good school." "What happened to your parents?" Pain flashed across Catherine's face. "My mother died of consumption when I was 20. My father never really recovered from losing her. He continued to work, but his heart was broken. 2 years later, in 1850, he was killed in an accident at a construction site. A wall collapsed and crushed him. "I'm sorry," William said, and meant it. "He left me the house we lived in, his tools, some savings. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for me to live modestly. I supported myself doing needlework and teaching reading and writing to children in the free-colored community. I had a small but good life. I wasn't wealthy, but I was free and independent. That was everything." "What happened 3 years ago?" 2 men came to my door one night in August. They said my father had owed them money. Gambling debts, they claimed. I told them that was impossible, that my father didn't gamble. They insisted. They said I would have to work off his debts. When I refused and showed them his papers proving there were no outstanding debts, they became violent. They beat me, tied me up, and burned my house to the ground. Everything I owned, all my father's papers, my freedom certificate, my mother's Bible, everything was destroyed." Her voice remained steady, but William could see pain in her eyes. "They kept me locked in a cellar for weeks while they arranged false papers saying I'd been born enslaved. Named Catherine with no surname, born in 1828 in Virginia. They sold me to a trader who took me south. I tried to tell people the truth at first, but no one would listen. A colored woman's word meant nothing against white men with legal documents. I was beaten for lying, beaten for trying to escape, beaten for being difficult. Eventually, I learned to stay silent and wait for an opportunity." "But you never stopped being who you were," William observed. "No. They could take my freedom, but they couldn't take my mind or my education or my sense of self. I hid it as best I could, spoke simply, kept my eyes down, acted the part they expected. But inside I was still Catherine Mitchell, daughter of James and Sarah, a free woman of Baltimore. I just couldn't prove it to anyone." William sat back in his chair, trying to imagine what she had endured. 3 years of forced servitude, of hiding her true self, of living in fear of discovery and punishment. And yet she had maintained dignity and core identity. "Why did you teach Margaret to read?" he asked. "You must have known it was dangerous." because she's so bright. And because education is the one thing no one can take from her. If I've learned anything from my life, it's that circumstances can change in an instant. Wealth can vanish. Freedom can be stolen. Security is an illusion. But knowledge once gained remains.